Welcome to the Frontline Man podcast. My name is Mark Queppet, and I'm a Catholic family man, and I've been a professional men's coach since 2013, where I focus on helping guys eliminate escapism like pornography, scrolling, gaming, etc., and optimize their performance in life. And today, I'm very excited to be joined by a guest here, Daniel Bradley. Thanks for being here, Daniel.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I came across your X profile, and you do something really interesting, it seems. So why don't you kind of just give people a little idea of what you focus on here in your work?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been a holistic transformation coach since 2015. And in the last 5 years, things started to really track differently into Christian spirituality. So it was really a return to kind of my childhood roots of being raised Christian. And the coaching certification program that I went through was really about biohacking and mindfulness and different ways to harmonize the nervous system. And so I've gone down a lot of different paths. Yeah, it really is. And but what was lacking and what really was laid on my heart was a more meaningful approach that was biblically oriented, that took into account the life of the body, because I wasn't seeing that done. And intuitively, I knew that there was a gap there, and it started to make a lot of sense to me just through, we could call it the Spirit, through the Word, through personal mentorship and coaching that I still have. And so that made all the difference for me in terms of like rooting my practice now, my coaching methodology in a biblical framework, really giving honor and credit to God, not discounting other approaches, but ultimately I'm sourcing it in a faith-based practice to connect the mind and body into that union for joy and for a connection with God.
Yeah, and that's what stood out to me, because a lot of times when I've encountered stuff about mind-body connection, people looking to understand the underlying neurobiology of, our internal experiences, our emotions, even spirituality, it's typically within the framework of kind of like a either New Age view or a very deconstructed sort of atheistic view, where it's like, it's all just neurochemicals, right? And what I love about what you're doing is you're looking at it through not a deconstructive, but a kind of reconstructive view of like, how do we see what's happening here at this fundamental neurochemical level, and what's the bigger story that's being told here. So that's what immediately piqued my interest, and I wanted to get you on here. Like, I don't know much about your content, and I was kind of just hoping to save it for letting us hash it out here.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that. Yeah. And what you're saying there is really true. I mean, that's my wheelhouse is, when the Bible says he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies. It's like, why would I want to go anywhere else? Like, I want to go to the source. Okay, so the greatest embodiment moment in human history, a man rising from the dead and giving us that level of innocence so we can stand confidently before God, everybody's judge, and know and kind of align our life and to align our conscience and to really own up to like, wow, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had a lot of failures. So how can I now be revitalized in my body with that truth? How can I be spiritually oriented to where it's not a show? Like, I want an authentic feeling of knowing God's blessing and his favor in my life. And so, it's a stripping away of all the falsehood. It's a stripping away, for my testimony is that. It's a stripping away of all the different practices and approaches, because I thought that somehow I was guilty. Like, I had a deep sense of guilt, a deep sense of shame. And that was more on like the identity level from childhood wounds. And when I was reading in the Psalms, and the Psalm says, hey, though my mother and father forsake me, God, it is the care of the Lord that will save me. And I was like, wow. I was like, the whole Bible is replete with all these elements of psychology and these different, it doesn't miss anything. And so we have to we have to kind of wade between the lines and say, okay, does this add up? Does this build integrity? Does this make me a more loving person? If I'm going to read between the lines and pray for the spiritual guidance of the Lord without any fear, but with courage and boldness, knowing that I'm a chosen son of God and that I'm cleansed, I'm forgiven, well, then from that place, how can I live an abundant life? And that's really my passion, is to show that way for other people and how to overcome those deeply embedded unconscious tensions of guilt, of shame, of feeling inferior, of fear. And to really understand, if God is for us, who can be against us? And when we get down to like the fundamental meaning of Scripture, that God really wants us to have an abundant life. He wants us to be emotionally healthy. He wants us to have an amazing sex life. He wants us to come home to our bodies and develop a bodily attitude of self-respect and faith. When I realized, okay, I had to really take the reins on this, because I wasn't learning this framework through church. I wasn't learning this but now through fellowship with the brethren, through deep connection and a strong, sincere fellowship with brothers in Christ and Bible study, and I've been able to really hone my craft with deepening scriptural framework that has made all the difference in my faith, that has made all the difference in how I serve others, and it's just given me kind of a hope and a vision that just keeps me going.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's all so cool. And there's definitely some parallels there. I want to get into your story, but just to kind of speak to what you're talking about here, like I remember when I was young, it was really the WWJD thing was big. I don't know if you remember that. Like, what would Jesus do? Yeah. And like that always used to tick me off so much, because I was like, well, I don't know what it feels like to be Jesus. And it's like, like that whole idea of the incarnation, God literally becoming a human. Yeah. What would it have felt like to be inside of Jesus's head? What did he actually feel? How did he process emotions? How did he process rejection? How did he actually internally experience this stuff? And that used to drive me nuts, because all I had was this like mixed up, painful ball of like chaos inside of me. And yeah, I was given, some, scripture and insight and all this kind of stuff, but I felt like I was consistently missing the internal mechanics for how to make this stuff not just make sense, but to feel right. So, that's why I think this conversation is really important. So, how about we do a little bit about your story? What I really want to do is get into kind of like your practical methods, but tell me a little bit about like what your journey looked like getting to this point. Like what drove you along this path?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I'll give you the kind of the Cliff Notes version. I'll hit the benchmark. So in high school, I didn't have kind of that life where I was kind of an outsider, because there was so much sexual guilt and shame in the family I grew up in. I loved girls, but my mom was always like blocking my connection, always on me, always. I mean, she was so domineering, and it was very hurtful. I didn't realize until midlife now, I didn't realize until how damaging that was. And it wasn't just then, it actually was rooted more deeply in childhood. And, a big part of my story is understanding, wow, this is actually so much more common than I think. This is actually the baseline of humanity. This is where humanity gets stuck on these preoccupations of fear, shame, and guilt that are in the body. And so, anyway, I got into martial arts. I was kind of picked on a little bit here and there, not too bad, but and then from there, my martial arts instructor introduced me to some meditation techniques and some energetic, like chi cultivation, you could call it. And so I got into that, and I started having some bad side effects because I was going to the extreme. I was I was really addicted to pornography, drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowd. And then I was trying to mix spiritual practices with that and trying to like awaken my energy centers. And oh man,
so you
it
do
just
all like
led
the
to hell.
Kundalini stuff and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. And it really led to a mind of hell. It really led to absolute chaos. It was like I was just opening up gates of hell on myself, because, and that was a big thing in terms of like walking back to those areas of my life and having all that transformed and kind of converted into hope and glory, beauty and goodness. And so there's been a great mighty work that God has done in my soul, because it just really perverted my whole view of life. It really shut me down more, and it caused, there was like a rebellious element in me because of how sexually repressed I was, and those in that level of, not being sexually respected, not being respected in like the pleasure elements of just enjoying life. Because, as a child, when if who we are as sexual beings is not respected and cultivated, yeah, that's going to manifest. That gets locked down in tension. It's going to manifest in addictions and all kinds of bad ways later in life. And so I was experiencing the brunt of that by trying to connect all these different things with the spiritual element. And so if there's one thing that I know that is so true is that, yeah, that's why sexuality and sexual energy and where we put our attention and how we spend our time is so important. That's why it's important to God. He understands how it really mars and twists the soul, hurts the personality. It hurts our ability to express ourselves with dignity and honor. And so that was a big time in my life that really hurt me deeply. And so what I did is I contracted in fear. And then I started to become very fundamentalist and dogmatic. I had like out of body experiences. I was hearing things and I was tripping out because I was seeing stuff. I'm like, okay, I know that's real and I'm not making this up, but this is freaking terrifying me. This is scary to me. And there was nobody there that was really there to offer a framework to say, okay, you are going way too far out of bounds on this. Like you need to calm down, settle your nervous system, become integrated. Like life has so many different dimensions, not this intensity, this drive. And so I shut down. I became very dogmatic, very self-righteous. On one hand, I was very sarcastic, and on the other hand, I was very self-righteous. I didn't have a balanced center. And then, from that place, I got, back into the world, was dating, was sleeping around a lot, got into bodybuilding. I mean, I was just like so worldly. I didn't know how to synthesize spiritual truths, what I had tasted, into an organic awakening of the body, into self-esteem, into being created in the image of God and knowing myself in that root identity. And so, I ended up getting married and and within a couple of years of marriage, I was really struggling because I didn't have the character for it. I didn't even know really what it was for. I just married because it's like, I want to have sex. And my understanding is that I'm going to feel really bad and it's not biblical if I'm having sex out of marriage. So I got married just to have sex and I didn't really know the woman. It was like, and so that lasted 11 years. And then, she ended up, more of my story. We'll circle back to that. But so about 2010, I got into men's work. I met a counselor when we were struggling in marriage, and he was the first counselor that actually acknowledged me for the childhood pain. He could really read my heart. He was Christian. It was the first Christian man that felt so down to earth to me, like it was treating me with respect and was witnessing me without judging me or looking down his nose at me or trying to like come up with some scripture and stuff that down my throat. And he was the first guy that looked at me point blank and he said, based on how you described your dad and your family situation, how do you even say that you love God? And I was like, I didn't even know what to do with that. I was shocked. I was like, this guy is giving me a permission to fully feel like what I went through in my childhood. Yeah. Like to kind of be my own person and to be acknowledged and respected by another man who's just calling it what it is. And he said something about the Oedipal dynamic, about how much I was a threat to my dad and his jealousy kind of shut me down. And he had this very heavy-handed religious hand to do that with a lot of intensity. And it scared me. And it made me feel intimidated and inferior. And then that coupled with my mother that had all these conditions on her love. I had to feel guilty and serve her and feel bad about myself in order to, have her approval. And it was just this really twisted dynamic. And I was like, wow, this guy who says he loves God, who's actually a minister as well, was connected with me. I'm like, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing. Like I could feel differently and that he was actually respecting me to grow in the right way. And then from there, a few years later, I got into men's work, got into like David Data. And then, and that's kind of where I started to leave what you could call the Christian faith. I was never really rooted in the truth of God being the source of my identity and my vitality. So I wasn't strong in the word. And so I started to read David Data's work, polarity, sexual dynamics, started to get involved in men's processing groups. And I started to find a new level of respect with other men that I'd never had before. Like I was able to express myself and articulate certain levels of emotional embodiment that they were like, that they really respected and honored. I was like, wow, I could really go places with this. And then I started doing really well at my corporate career as an insurance broker. And at the same time, I was getting promoted into a management position. And then And then at the same time, I was going through this workout program, and I got down like really chiseled, single digit body fat, really shredded and ripped. And then I'm in this management position. I'm like, wow, I got the car, the home, the wife, now the career, doing really well with money. But there was something missing, because I was finding myself like the attitude of my heart, the attitude of my body, I would say, hadn't really been healed. I was still suffering from these deep underlying mechanisms that were still controlling me. And so there was some friction on the job. I was finding myself kind of demanding and kind of almost punitive and harsh, really. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's gotten into me? Like, I'm being real critical. I don't want to be this way. And then I found this book that really changed my life. It's kind of got my foot in the door on the deeper work that still had to be done. And it was called The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. And she started to talk about fundamental human dynamics, about kind of transmitting the family climate we come from, the dysfunctional family climate, because we can't help ourselves. If we were shown contempt for our emotional world and for our basic human needs, to be seen, to feel safe, to feel soothed, to feel secure, if that was shown contempt and we were left hanging in our humanity and our fundamental needs designed by a relational God, to have that expressed, honored, respected, and to grow into the fullness of who we are. If that wasn't there, then yeah, big problems. And so I hired a somatic coach. It was the first time I'd ever paid like a big ticket price. Can you still hear me? Because the screen's kind of frozen right there.
Yeah, okay. I can hear.
And so it was the first time that I was like, oh man, I'm going to hire this guy. I don't care what it costs. I need to get to the root of this stuff. I was like, everything this woman is saying, even though she doesn't talk about God or Christianity or any of that, I was like, I don't care at this point. I just know what she's saying is true. And because I could see it coming out of me. And anyway, I hired this guy, and it changed my life. It was 3 months of somatic experiencing where I'm this grown man, and he's sitting looking at me, and he's saying, he says, you look terrified. And at first I was like, no, I'm not. Eventually it melted, and the denial, and where I was really feeling and these deeper emotional threads of the feeling state of my body that I had repressed because that wasn't allowed. I was repressed because I was ashamed. I was scared. I felt guilt, and I couldn't accept myself. And he, it was 3 months of a deep immersion, and then it ended with the therapeutic use of MDMA, and then from there it really broke the doors wide open, and that was really kind of the first stage of my deeper healing, I'd say. And from there, I ended up, buying an at-home neurofeedback unit. I ended up getting certified as a holistic transformation coach from there. And then from there, I ended up really getting more deeply into attachment theory and Daniel Siegel's work. And ended up getting certified in attachment work and how to help people kind of heal that circuitry. And then, so I started coaching people part-time at that period, and was seeing some good results. And a lot of it was centered on neurofeedback, attachment theory. But the thing that was missing was Christ. The thing that was missing was anchoring it into a biblical framework where Jesus can get to that inner child. Jesus doesn't talk about, hey, unless you become like a little child, you won't inherit the kingdom of God. He doesn't address that without knowing full well those fundamental childhood dynamics that we universally go through. He's speaking directly to that. And I was like, wow. And so right around 2017, in the course of 1 week, I found out that my wife was cheating on me. I had a terrible trip at a music festival. I was using MDMA recreationally. And I was demoted from my management position at work. I was destroyed, man. Everything that I didn't realize how much of my identity was really resting on all these achievements and who I thought it was through the world's eyes. And it broke me, man. It really did. I had never been at the bottom of the barrel like that before. And so, through powerful spiritual mentorship, through people that love God, I started to build myself back up. I met, one of my mentors there that taught me this pathway of bioenergetics, how to connect the mind and body. He started to explain things that nobody had ever taught me from church. First of all, that the gospel, Jesus on the cross, is the emotional abandonment of God's body. That's how much our emotional health means to God. First and foremost, it means so much to God to meet us there in our deepest emotional wounds so we can resurrect in the vitality and newness of life, knowing that we've been forgiven, and to stop feeling guilty, to stop accusing ourselves, to fully accept ourselves through the lens of his love for us, because we'll never get that through the world. We'll never get that through one another. Through fellowship, we can agree on that in spirit, and that strengthens the inner man like Paul wants to happen. But that takes time. It takes organic growth of possessing the soul and patience. And so I waded through it, and I was very consistent and diligent, almost we could call it religiously diligent in the devotion to getting my body back on track to become healthy and alive again. And it was through that kind of deepest moment of despair in my life that the Lord really reoriented me to knowing him and his goodness. It helped me to understand with a discerning keen eye. Okay, we got Joe Dispenza, we got, David Data, we got all this spiritual framework of the world. We got the body keeps the score. We got Gabor Mate with, the myth of normal. And so much of that is good. I mean, so much of it I agree with. But I was like, I started to see I just think this way. I love philosophy. It just comes natural to me like breathing, not philosophy and psychology. It always has. And I started to see like, wait a second, the Bible, it's all here in the Word. It's all here in the Word. And so, with that connected with the breath and body movements and the bioenergetic practices that I teach and I coach people into their own emotional health, their own, vitality is now I see like, well, I just want to root that in Scripture, because there was a perfect man that lived for all of us, the vicarious man who gave his life for all of us, has forgiven all of us, and he wants us to have that newness of life. And what I've discovered from where I was before, not giving credit where credit was due, to where I am now, man, it's the joy. It's the joy of knowing that I'm known and I'm fully loved just as I am. I don't have to put on airs. I don't have to front. I don't have to try to be somebody I'm not. And God accepts me just like that. And that's the best place to be. And that's my greatest discovery and where I see my life continuing to grow into and from.
Beautiful, man. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I mean, I think I definitely have some crossover in my own experience where, I got very addicted to porn. I got, some very painful relationships, some bad stuff happened in my life. And, I got really into the new age. I got into occult stuff. Like I was just looking for answers that my Christian upbringing didn't seem to deliver. And I was, struggling with all of it. And what I found is like, yeah, there's truth out there in these other traditions, but in my own experience, it was just kind of like enough truth to get myself in trouble with, almost like to just, find deeper levels of problems that like didn't make things better. In some ways made them a lot worse. And it was like my reversion back to God that really started to create a click. That's when I was able to, really start quitting porn and taking my life and doing something good with it. And I guess like for the people out there who are listening, all right, maybe they're resonating with the stuff you're talking about. What would be some signs that they have a neurological disconnect, a bodily disconnect from their spirituality?
Yeah. Wow. There's so many signs, energy levels. Are they exhausted? Are they working full time? No energy at the end of the day? Do they have dreams that are in the back of their mind, but they've never acted upon? What is their love life like? What is their sex life like? That's so key. How do they commit themselves in their marriage? And this is both for men and women. We suffer, biologically, we're very different. Our bioenergetic essence is antithetical to one another. And that's the beauty of how God designed it. But I'm just saying it's the same levels of repression, and I would say, the deepest wounds, I'm convinced, are relevant to every single human is not feeling free, having this internal voice that is constantly condemning and measuring us up to others. When I was in the world and kind of doing worldly things, and because I was lost, I was doing it because I thought that was some level of freedom. I didn't realize that it was about internal freedom. It was about having the joy of the Lord. If a person's lost their joy, that's a big deal. Trying to lie to ourselves and convince ourselves that we're happy when we're not. Those are big time symptoms, and not really having a fullness of being to where we're happy with ourselves. We're proud of ourselves. Like we believe in ourselves. You know, my belief system from childhood was so disjointed. I thought, when I first started to really feel good about myself, I thought, man, is this sinful? I started to just feel the pleasure of life, the pleasure of existence, the pleasure of authentic connection with other people. I'm like, dang, is this normal? I mean, am I doing something wrong? This feels too good. I literally thought that. I'm like, is this sinful? I'm
Right.
like, oh, no.
Yeah, there's a big problem,
God
I think,
is
in
ecstasy.
Yeah. There's a problem in Christianity where I think there's this idea that if you're not suffering and feeling bad about yourself, then on some level you're consumed with pride and you've like lost account of your sinful nature. And I think that for people who don't have a better option, a way to synthesize, you know, the truth of our sinful nature, but you know, with God's love, there's this feeling that, all right, in order for me to be good, I have to feel bad. Do you ever run into that working with people?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's endemic. And that has everything to do with feeling guilt. And all guilt filters down to sexual guilt. When we were, and it works like this, when we were in the fullness of our feelings with the opposite sex parent, we were in the joy of our sexuality. And then that got shut down, either through their emotional problems, through not being received with love and respect, for a container not being built around that with respect. Instead, we're related to instead of a mother's position, we're related to from a woman's position, from her own emotional problems and emotional dysfunction, from the emotional problems that her parents had. That's the biggest influence on our character structure, is the sexual relationship that they had with each other and how we're roped into those problems as children. That's it. That's the fundamental issue of humanity. It'll never be different. We can't talk our ways out of that. And because I've been able to go there, and the biggest revelations in my life have been when I started to form a personal relationship with my own body through the breath and body work practices and the energetic practices I do, my body was able to reveal these deeper levels of testimony of the emotional reality of what I actually went through. Most people have complete amnesia over those energetic dynamics of early childhood. We're these porous containers that absorb, with no fault of our own, the attitudes and values of our parents. And if they felt guilty, if they had emotional repression, if they didn't feel comfortable in their own sexuality, guess what? That's what we inherit. And that is what we have to work through. And is it easy? Absolutely not. But can you revitalize the body into the joy of the Lord and feel good about yourself, have a clean conscience, be completely familiar with all your mistakes and failures, and move on in life in a creative capacity and be very successful? Well, I'm a testimony of that. And so I like to go to the root of the real issue there. You know, that's what Jesus addresses when he talks about becoming like a child again. He doesn't bypass that. And the thing about Christianity, and I'm a Christian, so it's not like I'm bad. I mean, look, I testify of the faith. I know what the Lord has done for all of us. No, there's no exception. If in Adam all die, in Christ all live. It's just a matter of believing that and living into that and developing character structure from the root of our sexual identity. That's the course. And that only happens through a healing relationship with our own body. But my point is that's the big problem, especially in Western evangelical Christianity, with this idea that there's anything we can do to emphasize God's love for us. There's nothing we can ever do to increase God's unconditional love for us. But therein lies the neurotic pattern. Our bodies were born for unconditional love. In childhood, we didn't get it. It hurt our attachment circuitry and our nervous system. So we have to grow up and take responsibility for learning how to generate those good feelings on our own. And then with a graciousness and a humility of heart, be able to share that with other people. And that's the key. And that born from that process of possessing our soul in patience, just like the Lord says we need to do, then the fruits of the Spirit grow. But we can't, this is not a performance thing. It's a slow growth process of being committed and devoted to those spiritual principles that he's spoken to reality, that there is no way around. You know, when God says, don't judge or you're going to be judged. Don't condemn or you're going to be condemned. Show mercy, you'll be given mercy. That is literally spiritual law. And so what are we left with? Our own funk. Okay, Lord, help me work through that. Well, how do I do that? You got to work with the body. There's never going to be another way around it. If you want to get to the deepest roots of our soul, we have to work with the body and give it all to the Lord. Give it all to the Lord. And this is what really differentiates me from, other coaches and of, meditation work or the new age or whatever, is they just like, don't be afraid of the unknown, enter it and manifest the life of your dreams. It's like, okay, well, yeah, what about the character structure of your body that adapted, that's trying to perform for worth? What about the character structure of your body that was born of the sinfulness of being disconnected from the life of God within it? Because in childhood, you had a choice. Either I die because the feelings of being rejected from my parents feel like death, or I conform and I block out all parts of myself that are not acceptable. Well, unless you go back and heal those roots of the inner child born in the image of God for the abundant life he promises, you're not going to get to the bottom line of it. And so, that's really, my message, and what I promote is a biblical framework to understand just how merciful and good God is, because we literally can't help ourselves without surrender. And surrender has to do with complete self-acceptance and kind of a deepening into a surrender of the body, just like Jesus did. He surrendered on the cross, but we have to surrender to all those kind of wounds and invite the Holy Spirit to look at it, to witness us, to show us his true love and compassion that we haven't, received up to whatever point in our life that we feel we have this constant recycling of the same suffering, the same story, and the same stuff we keep going through. That stuff doesn't change without God and his mercy and his unconditional love.
Yeah. I love everything you're saying there. And, one of the points that really, stuck out to me is this emphasis of kind of like the unconditional love of God. And the way that I've tackled that in my work, primarily with helping guys, quit pornography and, develop, their sexual self-mastery, these kinds of things, is through this concept of dignity, where we have to separate our worth from our status, right? Like, status still matters. There's consequences to it. We want to, have our status reflect our inner goodness, but we have to first have a handle on what that inner goodness is. And so, like, my practical methodology for dealing with that is like, all right, well, we're going to quit porn, and you're going to do it from this place of realizing that you're already good. All right. Like, you're reaching for porn because you don't feel good enough XYZ way. Right. And to like bring this childhood aspect, I think a lot of these status attachments men reach for to try and earn their worth, these are echoes of these fundamental childhood woundings, right? So it's like, say your parents didn't love you unless you got good enough grades. All right. Well, you felt that in your core as a kid, and then you're going to play that out as an adult, being like, I'm not going to feel good enough unless I make a certain amount of money. And that stress, well, that creates a coping mechanism of, well, every time I feel this way, I can't handle it anymore. I got to turn it off. It's too painful. That's where I'm going to reach to porn. And so what I've found is that in the process of helping guys process their cravings to escape through pornography, they're in many ways repairing these fundamental like wounds that they experienced in their childhood. And so I'm curious, like, what's your methodology? What's like the practical path that you teach to help guys start solving these sort of situations, these pains, these spiritual disconnects, these bodily disconnects?
Oh, there's a very, very specific format of working with the body. And so overcoming, because every attitude of the body, right? So here's what we confront in people that are the high achievers, in denial of their inner world. They're just have this intensity about them, and they don't know how to relax. They don't know the joy. They don't know like openness and the pleasure of just breathing deeply and calming down and not always being on that kind of like high alert of what I need to conquer next. And work with the body, loosen up that tension.
So what does that mean?
And the method. Well, so there's different exercises on deconstructing those the character structure of tension. Like, that motivation is through the unconscious blueprint of I'm not enough until I achieve that. Or there's unconscious attitudes of I'm going to prove my dad wrong and that I'm not afraid of him. And I'm going to prove women that I can be dominant and that I'll never be humiliated again. Those are attitudes of the body. So what I work with is really the body, the bodily attitudes. And so I try to see beneath that to identify, first of all, with that person as a human being, as a child of God. That, like what you were saying, I start there. We have to first agree that you're innocent. And now we have to get that body loosened up from the character structure of guilt, from the character structure of being afraid of your own feelings, and from the character structure of being ashamed of your sexuality. So and that's all structured in tension. And so we always start off, we work directly with the body. There's very specific breath and body work movements. And this is what awakens the organic life force that'll begin to have its way as soon as we start to get out of our own way. That's the biggest problem. Is people just continue to trip over themselves. They start to experience a little bit growth, and then they start to pick out their own scab again. And so, oh my God, they're going to repeat that over and over again. And so it really is opening the body to the unconditional love of God already in there. Like there's no, okay, I finally surrender. There's nothing we can do as a human response to the love that's already within us. So I try to make that very clear. You're innocent. God loves you. You were already chosen before the foundation of the world from the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. There's no effort to prove yourself anymore. And so we start there, and then we start to work on the nervous system. And so I use a 3-tier approach. There's going to be the bioenergetics, so we deconstruct the character structure of tension and intensity. Open up the heart to self-acceptance. Open up the heart to accepting yourself in your animal nature, in your sexual desires, in your need to be seen, to feel soothed, to feel safe, to feel secure. So we start there. And then we incorporate neural feedback to help harmonize kind of these emotional pockets that start to become evident. There's going to be some deep kind of compression of darkness because you're going to see things and confront stuff in yourself that you haven't ever faced before. It's too scary. Nobody wants to face that stuff. But this is a very way of incrementally stepping into that to where it's not overwhelming, to where people gradually expand their window of tolerance to be with themselves and all their feelings in their emotional world. And that's so important. So we're simultaneously healing that window of tolerance, their attachment circuitry, so they can come home to themselves, so they can really embody all that they are, all their imperfections with hope and kind of that newness of life being stirred up within them. And so and then the third element would be some very simple, energetic work to strengthen the nerve fibers of the body. And it's not as esoteric as it sounds. It's just very, very basic stuff. So simple a kid could do it. This is not like meditating on chakras, getting out the crystals, none of that. This is practical, based in neuroscience. So it's this 3-tier approach for the holistic awakening of the body out of its emotional repression, to release suppressed feelings and to experience that childlike joy again and the vitality that can be awakened through these practices. So it's kind of a hands-on approach where they're working with their own body in that way. And the ultimate goal is to help them become their own person, to develop a sense of agency, a sense of their wholeness, and really a sense of self-acceptance.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about this, because one of the things that I discovered is that, autopilot, like going into a state of kind of compulsive action, I pretty much see that as just an interconnected web of internal tensions. Like you become like a puppet to these inner tensions. And so like one of the first things I had to realize about myself when I was quitting porn and this kind of thing was that it always started, the first tangible sign of me going off course was my shoulders would come up. I would get tense. It would start up here. And then that would exhaust me. It would start to lead to an emotional tension. Like working would become difficult. I'd get frustrated. And then all of a sudden that tension would mount to a certain point where my consciousness couldn't process it anymore. It didn't know how to. And then it would reach for the escape valve. It would look for that way to unplug. And so it sounds like what you're talking about here is, I know you mentioned like 3 layers, but would it be accurate to say that it's, on one hand, we're reconditioning the physical reaction while adopting a new narrative that supports the relaxation, that gives you permission to be relaxed, and which would disrupt these dysfunctional patterns in your life? Is that an accurate take on it?
Oh, big time. Yeah, huge. And that's part of the, because so much of, kind of going back to what I'd said before about, Western evangelical Christianity, it's like, okay, God's waiting on your human response. It's always what do I have to do to deserve love? Like, what's my next step? And it's like, yeah, that just only amplifies the root problem that you have to be something more than what you already are. And so it's removing the tensions that block the natural goodness of who we are, because we're made in God's image. We're not made in our parents' image. Our body was made by them, but not our eternal identity as a child of God. And so that's the goodness. And dignity is a character structure of the body. And so I like to connect that. And there's really two forms of integrity. Integrity is, okay, so you're making this 6-figure, 7-figure, you're a founder, you're married, on paper, you're amazing, right? Wow, look at you. You have this amazing status, you're powerful, influence. But internally, they know that they still don't feel that great. They know that they're missing a richness, a depth, and a joy in life. So that's integrity. There's a level of integrity to where they got where they're at in life, because there's a character structure that held that in place. There's a survival structure to their character. It's a survival structure. But then there's another level of integrity where the segments of the body are healed, where the head connects to the heart, and then the heart connects to the lower body. And so we're really, in my practice, we work on these 3 segments. Is you want to connect the head to the body to the soul. And ultimately, we want to end up in having a well-rooted lower body where we are completely identified with our sexuality. We no longer disassociate from our feelings. And the deepest feelings are the most primal energies of our sexuality that informs the primary directive, that makes the world go round, that all nature lives according to. And so this is kind of like the emotional growth of having a deeper descent into our organic, fleshly, carnal nature, and then developing the character of Christ from that by being awakened in our vitality. That's the whole framework there. And so, but it's important to understand, dignity is a body-based structure. Dignity is, I have self-esteem because I know who I am through God's eyes. I know who I am because and kind of going back to your point there, yeah, we're deconstructing all of the conditioning that I had to perform my way for approval. And all of that is a character structure of intensity. It's all there. It's this, I'm going to repress that, and then from that repression is going to be born this image of myself that I'm going to chase after, because it's this idealized version that I know the world approves of, that my parents certainly approved of, and that culture validates. So that's what I'm going to base my life on. But when you do that, you dedicate your life force and vitality away from your body in the basic fundamental needs of your body. And what is that? It's directly connected to who we are, made in the image of God. To be neat, to be seen, to feel safe, to feel soothed, and to feel secure. There's no performance in the world. There's no accolade, no trophy, no amount of income that can ever make up for that difference. And so it's about coming home to the body, healing the body, so we can have that kind of childlike joy arise in us, and our heart be awakened to God's unconditional love for a truly fulfilling life, to where it doesn't matter what we accomplish. Okay, that's just the icing on the cake. That's the gravy. But I know who I am according to my King. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I've usually the more, like, the higher performing guy I work with, the less they know how to relax and have fun. Like, many of them, they just kind of have defaulted to mindless forms of escapism or stimulation. And when we go to start trying to remove that, I'm like, well, their first reaction is, well, yeah, so then I can be more productive, right? I'm like, well, not exactly. Like, we have, like, I say we got like 2 things we got to do. Like, all right, part of your day, you're going to be, to some extent, the actions you're taking, they're a means to an end, right? You're putting in work so you can receive some reward in the future. You punch the clock so that, you can make money, feed your family, whatever. And you can enjoy that and you can be fully present in that. But at a certain point, you need to be able to actually just do things for the sake of themselves, be present in the moment with no agenda that's furthering a future cause, where you can just be you and feel good about it. And so many guys have lost it. Not even just the high performing guys, many guys who are struggling to get their lives together, they have no ability to do that. They have no rest. They have no center that they can return to feel safe, feel good. And without that foundation, we get depleted so fast. If you're always living for tomorrow, well, there's going to be a huge part of you that's screaming, saying, I want to be okay now. Right? I don't want to wait till my business is a 7-figure business. I don't want to wait till I'm married. I don't want to wait till XYZ. I need something now. And that's where so much of our dysfunctional coping comes from. So I'm curious, like, what's some like practical stuff? Like, I know you got a full system and it's probably best to approach it in a very kind of, organized manner, but like, what are some things that people could start doing now to begin repairing their relationship to their body in this, Christian framework?
Good question. Is they have to, I would say begin with just noticing where you hold your breath. Like what you were saying there, that's so key. I mean, you were like, okay, it starts here. Okay, that's the trigger to a cascade of other events that kind of one thing leads to the next. Yeah, get in touch with your body. Take some deep breaths through the day. Take deep belly breaths. Begin to journal. Like, what do you want out of life? Like journal the straight up honesty. Like journal about your wife or your spouse or your children. Like let that negative attitude, let it be seen. So much of people, they're in denial of the dark attitudes because they were never given permission. Like, okay, I can express that and I'm not going to die. I can be with these feelings and I'm not going to die. Like I can be straight up honest, like with everything I did. Like what's my most humiliating moment? What am I ashamed about? What am I afraid if people knew, like they would run out of the room if they knew this about me or whatever? Like just point blank honest. And then ask yourself with sincerity of heart, what do I want? And how much of what I want was determined by the expectations of others? And ask yourself, hey, if God really loves me, don't I want to believe that if God really loves me, that he would want these things for me too? And get down to kind of the soul elements. Like nobody in their right mind can deny that love feels good. Nobody in their right mind can deny that kindness feels good. I mean, and it's like, so ask yourself, what in me doesn't feel that way? And am I willing to accept myself that I am just kind of like this? And am I going to just settle on that? Or do I believe in a God that is so great that he can start to slow gradually? Again, it's not a performance, but, Father, can I change? Look, I don't feel, if love does feel good. Okay, I get it. Kindness does feel good, but can I change to where that becomes my character? And, that's the greatest thing a person can ever ask for. I want to feel good. I want to feel good. Remove all religion out of it. Don't even make the mention of God in it. Just, I want to feel good and happy. Okay, start there. What do you do? Because there's a reason people don't breathe fully and deeply, because breathing deeply accesses feelings and people don't like to feel. Why? Because the deepest feelings we have are those feelings of being betrayed, those feelings of our heart being broken in childhood. All the dynamics we have in our life that are dysfunctional all have a connecting throughway to those events. And the point is we can grow and mature in wisdom and stature, just like Jesus did. That's the point. God honors who we are in our humanity. He never bypasses it. This is why Christianity is the faith of embodiment. It's the only one that says, okay, God is so good that he wants to meet us in our dysfunction and help us to grow from there. And it's going to be good. And nobody ever said it's going to be painless. It is painful. But there's a through. We have to have belief and hope that true hope is going to be formed through walking through the fire, sitting with the fire, and really wanting to know ourselves in that deep and dynamic way. It's a real thing, and it's a personal thing, and that's why he's a personal God. And so that's where I would say is just get point blank honest with yourself. And then, if you have good friends, especially male friends, and my thing is this, and this is why I respect what you do so much and what you do for men. Men are not going to heal in the deep way of character transformation outside of the influence and connection to other men of character.
Yeah.
I will bank my life on that. That's
Can't
the hill
happen.
I die on. That's the fundamental truth. You cannot be affirmed in your sexuality as a man without character having been developed through other men that can support you in those different levels of the growth that needs to be done so God can connect with you there. I'm 100% convinced of that. And this is what again, what separates men like us from New Age, what separates men like us from trying to go to these meditation retreats or trying to study these, Kundalini energetics or whatever, is like, none of them talk about the character structure of the sexual nature of our being. Sexuality is the key to being. Now, sexuality doesn't have everything to do with our being, but that's the fundamental root, because that's where we're most deeply wounded. And all of our life springs from that. And when we start to see that our personality and life force vitality are all connected to that as well, you need somebody that can agree with spiritual principles that are founded on who Jesus said he was. On who he said he was and what he accomplished for all of us. Because then you're not like comparing, what would this guy think if I'm on this journey? Or, oh my gosh, what would this guy think? You're like, okay, no, this guy is presenting me as a brother in the Lord before God. And he's saying, Lord, meet him there. He's not presenting me before him and I'm subject to his judgment and his sinfulness. I've been so fortunate to have mentors and brothers in the Lord that have been like, hey, I'm presenting Daniel before God as my brother in whom I love. There is nothing more healing and purifying for the masculine soul than that. If men don't have other mentors like that, because I've had other mentors that are just kind of like, kind of doing their own thing, and but they didn't have good character according to biblical principles in their sexual nature. And they may have been spiritually, gifted and may have some insight, but they weren't helping me walk close with Christ. And so that's what makes all the difference in the world. And, and again, why I respect so much of what you're doing. But the main thing is there to meet other people in their humanity first and foremost, and help them to get honest in their own self-acceptance, and be there to help facilitate that self-acceptance through the way that the Lord has helped us with that in ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right with you on this idea that like men need other men in order to really find themselves, because I hear often, I've worked with a lot of guys they've tried to have like female therapists, or they try to be in co-ed, like mixed groups, and it just fundamentally changes the dynamic of everything that you do, where you're going to be always filtering everything you say through this perception of the feminine, and you can't like honestly interact with what's actually going on inside of you. And I like this point about journaling and this question of what do I want. Like my whole program is built off of 3 questions. What do I want? First and foremost, how can I win? Who will I be? And obviously we want to align that with God, make space for grace in it. But that first question of what do I want is, I think, scary for a lot of guys, because we're not just one piece, right? Most guys are really connected to the mind part. And then when they start tapping into the emotions, all this crazy shit starts popping out. It's like all these intense feelings, maybe aggressive feelings, maybe angry, maybe some wild sounding stuff. And they're afraid to go there because like, I can't really want that. And that's the thing is, that's what one part of you wants. All right. But truth, the truth of who you are, the truth of what you want, it's a synthesis. It's a synthesis of your intellect, of your emotions, and the context of your physical state. And until you can get all of them speaking to each other in good faith, right? Like, and get everything on the table, you don't know who you are, you don't know what you want. And you have to be willing, like you said, to kind of enter into this chaotic crucible where these crazy repressed emotions come up, saying this wild stuff. They smash against your intellectual beliefs about what's right, what's moral, etc. And there needs to be a settling that occurs. And your body is going to feel that whole process. It's going to get all jacked up. It's going to feel crazy. It's going to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And it sounds like, a big part of what you do is create a space and a methodology that allow guys to kind of relax into that and to let that process occur. Is that accurate?
100%. Yeah. And then you start to know women with a whole new level. And then that's why it's so important. I mean, look, this is exactly, and I wish more pastors would interpret this correctly, but what we're talking about here is this is what it means to nourish and cherish your flesh as Christ loves the church. This is what Paul says. Look, if you want to be a leader, and if you want to have sexual leadership, spiritual leadership over your woman, well, you got to first connect to your inner world with reverence and respect and invite God into that. If you're not connected to your inner world of emotions and feelings, and look, it's never a one time, it's not an all or nothing deal. It's about making incremental progress in the relationship you have with your own soul. And then you'll get the respect from women. And then you'll get the honor from women. And then you'll get women that want to share yourselves with them because, you know, if there's embedded hidden hostility because of the way your mother treated you and the dynamics and the maneuvers that you had to do to adapt to those circumstances, that's going to show up later in life. It's going to show up in any kind of dynamics with women. And so what we're talking about here is kind of, this is the payoff for men. I want to be relaxed with women. I want to be super comfortable in my sexuality so women take warmly to me because they don't detect any problems in myself. They don't detect me like, oh, I'm around this woman. There may be a chance, or I better hide my guilt. Oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't find out about this shame. It's like, no, women already read that. you got to go there. And the confidence and the boldness of being fully feeling and being like, hey, I accept all myself and you should too, because I'm quite a catch. I mean, you need to have that level of confidence, you know, where it's not a put on, but you're able to make a pitch for who you are and how much your heart, in light of God's love, has accepted your sexual nature and your animal nature. Because if you don't arrive at that, good luck in having a fulfilling life with a woman by your side that respects you and honors the spiritual format of order. God, Christ, man, woman, children. That's just the way it is. People can argue about that all day. That's not culturally popular to say about that, but that is 100% the way it is. And so you can argue against the sky being blue all day. It's not going to change the color of the sky. But those are spiritual principles. And when men can embody that, then their woman can be fun. Then a man can bring a sense of adventure because he knows the wind is at his back, that God approves of him. And it also brings a sense of humility and a sense of being able to allow that woman in her chaos to be relaxed.
So
allowing that woman to simply be herself.
Yeah, I'm right on board with everything you're saying here. So if we were going to just try and put it into like a practical point here, right? Let's work with a scenario I see regularly. All right, a guy, he is, you know, he's got some issues. All right, he's not showing up as the best version of himself, and you know, because of this, you know, his relationship with his wife is not great. You know, they're not having sex. She's not interested in it. He's, you know, really frustrated and angry about it. He keeps kind of blowing up and snapping at her, getting resentful, that sort of thing. Where would you say he should start his healing to like begin fixing this sort of problem?
If he's lost in a pattern like that, he needs to find another man that can show him understanding, that he can develop a sense of himself in his root. He needs to know how to start identifying with his body in a healthy, healing way, how to strengthen his sense of self, because those are just waves of emotion that keep beating him down. You know, one of the greatest things I've seen happen in one of my clients is he would find himself, and he had self-awareness enough to where when his wife had emotional intensity, he would find himself kind of collapsing and shutting down. And he couldn't help himself. It just happened automatically. And so that created this like redundancy, this loop where that was the pattern in the relationship. And I just showed him some simple techniques to begin to strengthen his vitality, to overcome that kind of shrinking back and to kind of hold his frame in those moments to where the wife could just do with no correcting, no antagonizing, no recriminations on her, but just to take care of him and a relationship he had with his own body. And literally within 2 weeks, he was finding those same moments and that stuff just kind of wash over him. There was a little bit of anxiety, but he was able to hold himself in a supportive position among that woman's chaos. And that made all the difference in the world. And he's doing really well now. I mean, he's just continued that momentum to build. But it starts with the man's relationship with his own flesh. It starts there. If he doesn't have that,
so his like response to the tension and the so like how he responds to that building inside of himself, right?
Yeah, because you feel the woman, you're like, whoa, her intensity. Am I in trouble? Like, am I going to be in trouble? Like he starts looking through, you know, did I clear my web browser? Like, I don't know, man, I'm guilty of something. What is she going to nail me on now? And it's like, okay, guy, you know, listen, you got to take ownership of those feelings because that's not her. It's on your character. And that's not a thing to condemn you with, but you can actually heal in a level where you start to feel strong. So many women are just afraid of, a telltale sign is if a woman says, "Oh man," or if a guy says, "Oh man, my woman, she wants to like put my nuts in a jar," or it's like, she doesn't want me to have any fun or any freedom. It's like, listen, guy, you're just simply replaying those childhood dynamics between you and your mom. That's the truth of it. So do you want to get better? Because that's not going to change until you change. And it's only going to change if you start working with your body and start developing a soundness in how you associate with your body that has a degree of vitality and dynamic from you disassociating in those moments than trying to point the finger and blame her, being a monster or somebody that's going to consume you. It's like if you're in your manhood and the strength of your feelings, she will have safety. It's not going to be an antagonistic relationship. So it always has to start with the man and how his relationship with his body, where he begins to heal the kind of energetic, or we could call it attachment circuitry of where he was shamed or humiliated by his own mom when he was a boy and in his sexual feelings. Well, you're no longer a boy, you're a man, but by working with your body, you can heal that boy that is having these unconscious automatic reactions to those very dysfunctional relational marital dynamics.
So I agree with what you're saying here, but what happens if you come across someone who, they had a really good relationship with their parents? They like, I've seen it, that's pretty much what I've had. And I'm not saying it was perfect or whatever, but I didn't feel like I really accrued a tremendous amount of trauma or stuff from my parents. It's felt like it was more stuff that I, just kind of happened throughout my life, and there was no, it's hard to trace it to specific things. Like I found some guys, they end up just kind of digging in their past. They get caught in this, what I would call like a therapy trap, where it's always just like looking backward, and they never get anywhere. They might, build some understanding of things, but things don't actually move forward. Have you ever seen anything like that? And if so, how do you address it?
Yeah, well, that's and that's the thing. Everybody's going to be at a different level of awareness. People are going to have different backgrounds. And you're absolutely right. It's like, you don't want to just lick your wounds. It's like, how do we get up and running? And so there's got to be a perfect blend. And this is the process of kind of the natural organic growth of getting out of our own way and allowing the true self, the authentic feeling state of the body to begin emerging. And so, because if you're not working directly on the body, if you're just trying to do the mind and talk, it's not healing the root. It's not healing the core of the dysfunction. And the core of the dysfunction always has to do with the separation from the body and the feeling state. And then we can develop a powerful mental ego and a mind that kind of keeps that stuff trapped in the body. And so this is why I work directly with the body and have people go through the body-based practices that I teach, because that gives them kind of a balance as to where the body will start to give, the body will start to show them stuff that they've been through, that they've repressed, that was down and pushed down for a reason. But simultaneously, as the cathartic kind of moment happens, they're replacing that with life and vitality. And so it's kind of a simultaneous growth. It's like we're incrementally expanding the window of tolerance, and we kind of get our legs underneath us. We start to develop a stronger sense of self and a healthy ego that can process the past, but not get hung up in it and still continue to move forward to tomorrow, to where we can release enough energy that becomes a creative base that we begin to kind of create a vision and craft the life we want to live from. But the past is always going to be there. At any given moment, a person's past is always with them. And I would say, this is why people have a hard time in their thought life, is that the tensions that we embody, there's emotional energy there that carry a narrative of being unworthy or unlovable. That's it. If people want to renew their mind, they have to truly renew their mind. They have to work with their body, because you can't change your inner state by willpower. It doesn't work that way. You can accomplish a lot with willpower, but you can't change your inner state and heal those deep wounds just with willpower. It doesn't work. You have to surrender to the body, the life of its feelings, awaken vitality to move forward. And it's not an easy thing, but it's doable.
Yeah. I mean, so what I've come to is the conclusion. It's like, all right, well, how do I start feeling this love, right? Like how do I actually do it, right? Like, what are the steps? And my best take on that is, like, when you give yourself permission and the space to feel your deepest pains, what you're doing, especially if it's done in an attitude of goodwill, openness to God being there and aiding you. It's like a loving openness to feel your own pain. That is a sacrifice for your own benefit. And when you're engaging in sacrificial love for yourself, feeling your own pain, feeling those unmet desires inside of you, all this stuff, that is how you get to know your sense of worth. That is how you start to build your dignity from the ground up on an experiential level. Because until you're willing to suffer for your own benefit, this idea of love, it's really just kind of an abstract, nice sounding concept. But, Christianity teaches us that love at its, deepest sense, it's the cross. It is a sacrifice. There is a pain that must be confronted. And so what do you think of that? How important is it for a man to be able to just feel his pain with love and acceptance?
Oh, that's everything. I mean, what you're saying there is very biblical. I mean, that's exactly what Paul says. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed to the renewing of your mind, offering your body as a living sacrifice. And so let me break that down without the scriptural tone. It's just man to man. You have to develop a relationship with your suffering. That would heal mental illness right there. If you develop a relationship with your suffering, that denotes self-acceptance. You're saying, okay, I can't go to my mom, I can't go to my dad, I can't go to my friends. This is just my conscience before God. This is the whole point of the Psalms. If you read the book of Psalms, you'll see David, he wasn't respected by his brothers. His dad looked down on him. He was marginalized, being, hey, go tend the sheep out in this field where nobody's around. This is where the invisible go. He had a hard go. And guess what healed him? His ability to express those things to God. His ability to say, had my mother and father not forsaken me, I'd not have known the care of the Lord. He had a relationship with the suffering. If you read the Psalms, you can't read the Psalms without recognizing that. And David was really a man's man, in spite of all of his, what he went through. Okay, that's the story of every human being. We've all messed up big time. And so, but connecting to the relationship, to the suffering of, okay, why did I get that? You may not even have all the answers at first, but just the fact that you can attune to that and develop a relationship and continue to go back to that, and not stay there, and not get immersed with it or over-identify with it, but that's where dignity does develop, is by, okay, this is the mess I'm in. How can I create beauty and goodness? And even to have that level of hope and awareness is really the beginning of transformation and true growth.
Yeah. Well, this makes me think of like an exercise I practice myself, where I call it like cleaning out the castle, where, I particularly do this when I'm really, kind of jacked up, and I'll view my mind as like a big castle, and there's all these different rooms. And what I do is I invite Jesus into my castle. I say, hey, come here. I got to show you some stuff. All right. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not in a great state right now. And I'll go through the rooms. Like each problem is its own room. I'll open up and it's like, it's a mess in there. There's, monsters, there's, chaos, things are on fire. And I'll be like, hey, I invite you in, this is your room now. I'm giving you the castle. And like walking through and feeling what's behind all of these doors and inviting the Spirit into it, inviting this, on a conceptual level, God. I think that translates to the spiritual experience when you allow it to be felt, is something that can kickstart this. So for anyone out there who's wants to experiment with some of this stuff, try this exercise. Envision this castle of yourself. Invite Jesus into it, and show him your dirty rooms. Show him that closet where you've been shoving everything. Let it all spill out and hand it over. Surrender it, because I think one of the things that really screws guys up today is this concept of ownership, where it's like, all these problems, they're mine. I got to take responsibility for everything. And on some level, that's good. We do want to take responsibility for what we have in front of us. But really, we're not called to ownership. We're called to stewardship, which means that ultimately God's the master. He should own, he should be, all of everything that you are should be his. And so you got to learn how to surrender. There has to be this surrender point in your integration process of yourself. Like, you need to know where it's in God's hands, where Jesus can begin to transform you and your internal experience. And I'm just curious, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that there's some merit to that. That's again kind of getting into the mind, and the way I would approach that is, and again, I would say that there, definitely some merit to that, but that stuff can also, if it's just, if it's just in the mind, I think what we're really saying is the same thing. You want to kind of bring that.
Well, so
bring
when I
that
say
to
the
God,
mind,
form a relationship with your messiest part. Yeah.
well, the point I maybe didn't highlight is that when you open up the door, you got to feel everything that's there. So you're not opening up the door in the mind, but you're also opening up the door in the body. You're saying, this is where this pain sits inside of me. This is how it manifests physiologically, and bringing that as well to speak to your point, just to clarify.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where so much of the blind spot is this is people don't feel what they don't feel. The body can be so wrapped up in tension. It's like they're not really feeling what is in there and what's causing these problems. And so, getting familiar with how we think and what we focus on, where our attention goes, that's always a first step for sure. And then inviting God in as a companion into that so we can witness it with clarity. And we're not just thinking in terms of, oh, what would this person think of it? Or what if this person saw me now? Or that's a big deal. But yeah, seeing how the body is holding those tensions. And then, my experience, and then also with working with people, is you just don't know what you don't know. I mean, there's a whole reason why those tensions, these unconscious muscular tensions, they imprison our spirit. They kind of embalm our true self. They lock away our vitality, and releasing that is going to release the suppressed feelings that lend itself to kind of continuing to do this pattern of these problems we have, these addictions we have, this way of thinking and framing life in a certain way that is broken. And so the cure for that is, for my approach, is developing a healing relationship with the body, learning how to identify with it well, and then seeing, by the release of the tension, how we can incorporate that, integrate that into kind of the newness of life and a kind of a fresh look on things. And I don't know of any other way to do that other than working with the body. But there is some complementary elements with some journaling practices and some of the ways of the mind, but the whole point is to kind of get that synchronized, to get the mind and the body hooked up into a more fulfilling state of being, because now the heart is open to the fullness of all your feelings. And that's where most men are troubled, is there's this internalized, culturally manufactured side of themselves that is always causing instantaneous judgments over, I can't feel that, I can't show that. It's always this strategizing over presenting themselves in a very specific light of power, of status, of frame, instead of who they truly are as just a child of God in the simplicity of who they are, just made in His image. And so there's so many layers to get through to get to that. And it's never a one and done, oh, okay, I'm through. But it is a place of self-discovery, a place of looking at these specific practices for my approach in terms of kind of like part of a daily healthcare and mental hygiene of, if I have fear, if I have preoccupation with the past or the future, okay, that's going to show up in my body. And then you get well schooled on your own personal map. You develop kind of an internal intuitive guidance system. And that's the best thing I could ever do for people, is learn how to be responsible for generating. You are a spirit of the Most High God. You can generate your own good feelings, but you're going to have to work with your body until you kind of get to the clearing. And then you're going to have possession of your own internal map. And then the world is your oyster from that point. But you're going to have to go through a lot of the ways you've developed as strategies and compensations for embodying messages about your worth and your value that are not the reality of how God sees you. And so that's kind of possess your soul with patience, develop that map, develop an intuitive awareness, and then be responsible in how you generate those good feelings according to the vision and purpose you have in your life. And that's kind of the package to get people up and running on their own to pursue whatever goals and dreams they have.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, what I was talking about, that's best if you already have an awareness of what you're dealing with. But what you're speaking of is a lot of times people don't even know what's got them hung up, right? And so if you go right to the body, you engage in the processes that release those trapped emotions, you're going to realize, oh, there's this whole thing I didn't even realize was holding me back. And in my work, typically that's done automatically because that happens whenever you use porn. Because it gives that's like that part building up, kind of like a little volcano, this pressure underground exploding out. So that's how I've typically found it. But for people who don't have a porn problem, yeah, probably, if they don't have any kind of overt coping behavior that's really holding them back, then this kind of body work is probably essential, I would say, to really do that deep cleaning required to reach that state of natural alignment you're talking about.
Yeah, and fellowship. And fellowship. Just, having other people that you are consistently checking in with, and that's so important, where there's just an authentic goodness there, where you affirm one another's innocence, you affirm one another's shortcomings, but you still appreciate and have, goodness and goodwill extended towards them. And fellowship is it can never be discounted, because we're none of us are in it by ourselves. And so I'd say that's a huge part of it. And that can happen through the coaching process, but then also help, people developing a strong network of friends where there's common values and common goals shared. Because, I know right now there's a ton of men in this coaching space, but they don't have biblical values. They don't have a biblical framework. They're still about kind of willpower and grit and determination and life hacks. And it's like, that's okay. That's better. You got to start somewhere. That's okay to a certain point. But they almost develop this kind of David Goggins attitude. And it's like, wow, okay, not good. Because you're just dragging your body behind you, friend. It's like, your body is not you. It is this creature entity that you can have an amazing life if you develop a relationship with it. When you die, when you pop out of this body, you're in an automatic, joy of the Lord, because you don't have this carnal nature that's hormonally driven by the primary directive to have its own freedom and independence. And so, what I truly believe is that our greatest purpose on this life is to develop a relationship with our body that mirrors the grace and the goodness of the Lord, and how he healed his body through the tomb, and to bring out the fullness of life, the fullness of the Godhead dwells within him and within believers in bodily form. And it's like, wow, I want an ongoing experience of leaning into that for my personal self-discovery, to know who I am and whose I am according to that framework. Because if I'm left on my own, well, what do I have? Just, well, pardon my French, but a dick measuring contest according to where other men are at in the world. It's like, so many guys just end up there. Okay, well, finally I got the girl because I had enough frame. Well, finally I have that, 8-figure bank account because I was persevered enough and used my determination, my willpower. And I have my kids and they're well behaved because I make sure, that they are. And it's like, okay, but you're way over tense, dude. You don't have any joy. It's like,
right.
And then what? And so that's the point, and people, one of the greatest influences in my life has been Alexander Lowen, the father of bioenergetics. And now he doesn't explicitly come out and say, he'll mention God a few times, basically saying that's the ultimate spiritual feelings, being close to God. But he wasn't, a professing Christian, whatever. But I've never read another man that helped me to reframe the relationship with the body as much as he has. And everything he talks about in his books lines up with my spiritual mentor, who happens to love Jesus and has helped me along in all of my progress and growth. But the point there is, when you develop a relationship with your body, it takes on a totally new texture of life. It takes on a totally different meaning. And that's really the key connecting point, is we can't do good unto others unless we're first experiencing that good unto ourselves. Our default state, sadly to say, is we unconsciously do unto others the power dynamics that were done unto us, unless we kind of align with God and the character principles of dignity, integrity, goodness, honesty. And my point here, if I'm working with high performers, is you got to understand there are ego values that are complementary to the heart and the body. And that's what they are: integrity, dignity, honesty, fairness, respect. Those are ego values, and those are the right kind.
Right.
Because those are the kind that feel good to the body and that the body responds to. And those are the kind that the world will respond to in kind. And so that's really the emphasis on the body-based work, is that you'll develop an organic health and vitality that that happens naturally, that you can't force by the will, but that you begin to understand the life of the body, your body side of the story, what it's been through. You heal it into a greater character growth that begins to emerge to really benefit this world by offering the value of who you've become as a man through God's eyes.
Beautiful, man. I think that's a great place to end it here. I think you got a really interesting perspective on this, and let us know where can people find you. What's the best way for people to find your work and follow you?
Thank you, Mark. So Genius of the Body on X, and then also on YouTube. I'm growing my channel there, and I'll have a lot more up and coming videos. And so really on X and YouTube for the moment, if they want to reach out and connect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. If any of you are looking to quit pornography, click the link in the description below. I've got a special training there that'll help you out. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Make sure you follow follow Daniel. My bad. And drop a like, leave a comment, and let us know what you think. Catch you later, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.